Welcome, everyone, to day 2 of the Inclusive Leadership Summit. This is the healthcare session for today. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. My name is Cindy McEnor. I am the moderator for this session. I am also the program chair for health professions here at the University of Phoenix. That said, I'm coming to you live from Washington State in the southeastern part. As I mentioned, I will be moderating this session and we will introduce our panelists here in a few moments. If you have any questions, feel free to add those to our chat. We will get to questions and answers at the end of our session. Just to share a little bit about myself. Again, as the program chair, I mostly spend my time with our MPH program and our faculty. I have a deep passion for public health. I'm also, aside from that, certified as a mind-body medicine training facilitator and have a background with adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, especially as it relates to first generation college students and also underrepresented and diverse students. My career really got started as a community health educator in the heart of Baltimore City. That sort of set the stage for the trajectory of my career thereafter and my passion for working with non-traditional and underrepresented students. With that, I am going to let our panelists introduce themselves. We will move on to facilitated questions and a conversation after that. But with that, I want to welcome our panelists. Thank you so much. We look forward to your expertise and your experiences. I am going to pass it off to Leah Renee Henry. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Leah Renee Henry. I am a care manager with Sokoa Aging and In-Home Solutions, recent graduate of the University of Phoenix. I got my bachelor's in social work and I just stepped into a new role. And I work with the elderly and disabled, just a passion of mine. I've always been in a serving role. And it's just something that, makes my heart smile.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Leisure Brown. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you today. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us. I'm, I guess, what you would call a seasoned nurse. I've been around a long time. I grew up in not far from Leah Renee, it turns out, in Northwest Indiana, right outside Chicago. Went to Valparaiso University. Took a job at a teaching hospital at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's in Chicago, and it opened my world. After that, I became a naval officer and came to California, worked at a lot of teaching hospitals here, and then a very well-respected mentor of mine introduced me to the world of correctional nursing. And I joined the California Correctional Healthcare Services. We work along California Department of Rehabilitation, and we provide healthcare for nearly 1,000 inmates. So it's an incredible experience. It's quite an underserved population, and as well as recruiting nurses from an underserved population is part of what we do and what we really value. So I'm really excited to be in this conversation today and just really looking forward to hearing from all of you as well. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Lenisha Watson. I'm originally from Indiana, but I've been in Florida for going on 5 years. I recently took a new role as a behavioral care manager with Concert Health. I am a wellness advocate. I love all things recovery and mental health, not illness. And I am excited and grateful to be here. I look forward to adding my perspective on this topic and hopefully garnering some from all of you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. If you'll allow me, I'm going to read my introduction. That helps me keep from rambling. I graduated with my MSW from the University of Michigan in 1983 and have since received licensure in Tennessee as an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker. In 1995, I earned my EDD in educational psychology from the University of Memphis, which has really served me well in combination to my previous clinical training for my current role. And my current role is I'm currently a professor with the University of Tennessee College of Medicine here in Chattanooga, and I serve on the faculty with the Department of Family Medicine, where I've been since 1997. My primary function is as the Director of Behavioral Medicine, which involves providing and directing mental health training for 18 family medicine resident physicians who are doing their 3-year training with us. In 2015, I was also appointed as the Assistant Program Director, which in many respects was recognition of the additional roles I play in planning departmental educational and program evaluations. My role with the Department of Family Medicine has really put me on the front lines of primary care practice as well as education. One of the more exciting aspects of my job in recent years is being involved with and helping develop an increasingly interdisciplinary dimension to our healthcare team. And as an old school professional and probably a poster child for privilege, I'm also looking forward to using this discussion today to help me identify and perhaps address some of my own biases over time. So I'm very glad to be here. Hopefully this will be interactive for you folks as well as for me. So I look forward to answering questions and challenging myself in the process as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm loving the energy already. I feel like most of our panelists said something about learning from others as well. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of reciprocal learning. I feel really excited about that. So with that in mind, I'm going to just jump into some of the questions that we have that we can discuss today. Again, for the audience, if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to add those to the comment box, and we will get to those when we can. If not at the end, before then. All right, let's see here. If it's okay, can I start with you, Leah Renee?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. I was wondering, and this is for the other panelists as well. I just thought, I didn't mean to pick on you, but we'll start with you. Tell us about how you approach the topics of emotional and structural barriers as a leader, through leaders that you have worked with and teams that you've been on.
From my experience of working with some leaders and how they approach emotional and structural barriers, many of them had an open concept. They were there to help me learn, but they were also open to learning. They did not take their role as a dictatorship. They wanted to see things from my perspective, just as fresh eyes, and being able to give feedback. So I appreciated that, first of all, because a lot of times you are in situations where it's just, this is what it is, and you just have to roll with the punches. But many of the leaders that I've encountered are open to my experiences and what I had to bring to the table. Just trying to break down some of those barriers and allow me to grow in the process as well as them.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll step in and contribute a little bit more to that.
Sure.
For those of you who have experience in formal medicine, you probably know it's fairly hierarchical. At least it has been historically. It's changing somewhat over time, but still many of the current leaders, people in leadership positions, my age, thereabouts, grew up in a time where physicians were at the top of the hierarchy, and you just kind of work downstream from there. That's changing, like I say, that's changing somewhat. So what I've found is that the way to address some of these institutional barriers is to not necessarily address them head on, but to talk about outcomes. Physicians, especially the good ones, will be very quick to say that my primary care, or my primary interest in taking good care of my patients. So if you can show them how making these changes actually helps them improve the care they deliver to their patients, now you've got them interested. And I don't want to sound like I'm dodging the issue, but what I've learned is that if I can address issues where we have a common interest, that usually works best. And with physicians, being seen as a reputable doctor, if we want to talk about ego, or just having that altruistic, I want to take the best care of my patients, there we can have a conversation. And if I can convince them that doing things differently, doing things a little out of the box, demonstrate and document, here again, you have to convince folks. Now, buzzword in medicine right now is evidence-based practice. You have to be able to demonstrate. If I can convince them that, yes, there is a better way to do it, now I've got their attention.
Wonderful.
I like that you said that, Bob. We use the collaborative care model, which is the multidisciplinary team, healthcare team consists of a care manager, a physician, and a psychiatric consult. So when you're saying best care, I don't think you can say best care without it being holistic and involving pretty much everybody, including the kitchen sink. When you're talking about all realms of care, identifying environmental, physical, mental, all kinds of factors in that patient's care or that person's care.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And if we have opportunity later on, I've become a very strong proponent and advocate of interdisciplinary care. And currently in our office, we have a pharmacist. We have myself as a social worker, social work interns. Some of you later will be real interested. We're building bridges with the MPH program here in town, what I call zip code medicine. And it's just been a wonderful synergy. And I think that's also helped break down some barriers and help people say, hey, wait a minute. I don't have to be the Lone Ranger here. And these other folks can help me look good. And again, I don't want to sound negative, but we all want to look good and we all want to do what's best for our patients, for our clients. And using those structures has been very helpful. And maybe we can talk some more about that later as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you guys, especially, the idea of collaboration and the structural barriers we all face. In corrections, it's very interesting because obviously it's a paramilitary organization, right? And inclusion is a difficult subject, and with the racial disparities that are out there. So as a nursing, us embracing and be able to have that conversation is so important. And our deputy director is one of those people who puts her personal story out there, lays it on the line and opens that conversation, and learning from mentors like that who are willing to be open and honest and have that conversation and begins the change. And structural barriers in a large state organization are challenging. So we have to be able to have that conversation. And I see our organization and our department moving in that direction. So it's exciting. It's a slow move, being so bureaucratic, but it's so essential that we don't stop the conversation. We have to be able to willing those long-term changes through structural and dealing with the emotional piece so we can really have empathy and care for our patients well. We also do a whole person care. And it just, every single member is a part of that team, from the custody who does the safety and security down to the nurses who are really seeing those patients. So it's just so important that those barriers are addressed and they're spoken honestly about in kind of a safe environment.
Absolutely. Thank you. I was wondering, I've heard multiple folks talk about collaboration or breaking down barriers. I know, Bob, you talked about reaching other physicians with where they're at, demonstrating relevance. I was wondering if you could expand on that for any of the panelists, if you were able to give our audience sort of some best practices or guidance on how to break down some of those barriers, how to increase inclusivity in their organizations. What would you say are some of the best strategies that you have seen or implemented?
Sure. I can start out with that. Again, okay. You're going to see my bias coming through here as a social worker. We have we have had for a number of years two graduate level social work interns doing their field placements with us at a time. They're developing some clinical work, but a lot of what they're doing is what's referred to as social determinants of health. And here we're talking about things like transportation. Can you afford food? Do you have stable housing? Do you have social support networks? Do you have a neighborhood, for your MPH folks, that's safe for walking? Do you live in a food desert? All those type of things. And what we're doing is we're addressing this in a couple different ways. Number one, my experience in the past has been physicians are uncomfortable asking those questions for several reasons. Number one, that's not their training. And number two, even if they do want to ask the questions and get the information, they haven't been trained to deal with it. And so they say, do you have a problem affording your food? If someone says, yes, I do, they don't know what to do with that. And that's a very awkward situation to put anyway. Now, if we have our social work interns here and they ask a question, they say, I have someone here that would be glad to talk with you right now, right here. Would you like me to introduce them? Or after our visit, would you like to spend some time with them? We've provided them an avenue that was previously either very uncomfortable or just not even on their radar to really address care. And if we're talking about something like transportation, all of a sudden our physicians' no-show rates go up or go down, they improve because our social workers are now involved in helping arrange transportation, getting rides, connecting them with rideshare services, whatever that is, so that they can get to their appointments on time. Diabetics, that healthy food is too expensive. Well, if we can connect with a social worker and help them do some training as far as how to get the food in the first place, maybe do some minimal training as far as nutrition, but just connecting them with resources, the physician's stats start looking better. So we actually have a research program going on right now, and I'm going to shut up here just a minute. Basically looking at non-medical issues, which are keeping our hypertension rate so high. And so that's where the pharmacists and the social workers in particular come in and play non-medical roles, but that can be critical in helping people reach those hypertension goals as well.
Wonderful.
I'd like to share some best practice. I know as an organization, really valuing just culture has been something for us, one of the best practices we've used. And we use that through healthcare incident reporting, through sharing of information. And it's really helped engage the confidence of the staff to really show some of those issues that we have. And in nursing, we embrace shared governance. So we have 34 institutions. So giving them new tools as we come out of COVID, making it new, people owning their practice and being able to share across the board has really helped. Those are some of the best practices that we use every day.
Thank you.
I would say meeting people where they are. Don't give them an opportunity to have to call in a referral or go to another location. Catch them at that office visit. Send them through the gamut of physician, mental health, behavioral care specialist, pharmacist, nutritionist. As much as you can offer them in that visit, treat it like you'll never see that person again and throw everything you got at them then. I like to, like I said, I'm a kitchen sink person. The resources are not mutually exclusive. If you need one thing, 9 times out of 10, you also need this other thing. And the social determinants of health can be barriers if you don't address them. And I think the way you tackle them is all or nothing. You get that person while you have them in the hot seat, you throw everything you can at them. You get them to the people that they need to see right then.
I love that. I know that whole person care is so important to us. We used to be in this environment where you just dealt with the one complaint. And now we've moved to this whole person environment where you embrace that person coming in the door. And a correctional facility, we're actually in their house, essentially. So, we have a captive audience and we're responsible. We have a duty to make those connections and really look at that person as a whole and then work with our interdisciplinary partners as well as our community partners, because we're handing these people back off, right? And we need to do that in a very thoughtful, honest, and a very thorough way. So it's so exceptional, those commitments and those links that we have to make throughout the organization as well as our department and the community. It's just essential.
Wonderful. Thank you. I didn't know, did you want to add anything, Leah Renee?
Just to piggyback off of what Lanisha said about helping the patient before they leave, because if you give them the information to go home and try and find these resources on their own, a lot of times they get discouraged because they get the runaround a lot of times. So if we can help them there in the moment and get things set up for them before they leave the facility, there's a more likelier chance that the resources that they actually need, that they'll actually receive those with our help. So I believe we have the duty to go above and beyond to make sure that people don't get stopped by the barriers that can sometimes be put in place.
Wonderful.
I agree, Leah. And it's with my experience, I've worked with a lot of people experiencing homelessness. So I literally may never see you again.
Yeah.
So while I have you, I want to apply for food benefits. I want you to see the medical van or set up your initial appointment. I want to be able to provide resources. I hate saying I don't know. That's not helpful at all to anyone, especially if they're in the middle of a crisis. What I like to say is that we'll figure it out. We baby step things that feel overwhelming so that we can get as much progress done today as we possibly can, because I may never see you again. So I want you to get the whole shebang today.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is great. I feel very energized by all of the whole person care. I think that's so important with holistic health and just actually seeing people for who they are, right? I guess with that in mind, I want to sort of shift very slightly to chat about open dialogue. So, I mean, I know that obviously with whole person care, you're interacting with those that you serve, but can you share more about the importance of open dialogue and conversation with regard to your own leadership practice or leadership in general, as well as how that actually can support the idea of breaking down barriers and supporting emotional health?
I can start with this one. You know, it's interesting when you talk about that barrier, because we have them as leaders in the organization, and we have them all the way down to the institution. And inclusion can really be interesting in a correctional environment because people come with their own bias, right? And so on an organizational level, us embracing now implicit bias and actually doing training for the leadership really helps us grow and engage that. But it's so important, like in practice with my team, that we have those conversations, because how we deliver that whole person care and the tools we give those nurses as well as our interdisciplinary partners, we have to be open to that discussion, or we'll never be at that patient-centered care. They're at the heart of everything. And we come just as out in the civilian sector, you know, folks come with their values and what they say. And yesterday when Tim Wise was really talking about honesty and respect, you earn that through the education. And I think educating those patients, and like you were talking about, Lanisha, you know, the kitchen sink is, if I introduce those mental health programs we have, and I introduce the Hep C programs we have, and the other options, and our substance abuse program, right? All those things, if I give you an introduction to that, and then as I keep seeing you and I build that relationship, hopefully I'm also going to build that avenue for you. So it's so important, but I have to let go of some of the bias I have along the way to do that, and not make an assumption because you belong, you know, with, or you affiliate or belong with a certain group, right, that you may not be open to that. I'll give you an example. So mental health in corrections, some affiliations don't believe that should happen or be allowed to happen, and they can pressure someone else not to accept it. That's not much a difference than outside of corrections, right? And so we have to be able to have those conversations, and we have to start it with each other first, and then we have it with our team, and we make sure that we are listening to everyone, because every time we do, just like yesterday when I was listening, I learned so much from other folks. It really makes you introspectively do things so you can be a better leader.
For sure. I think that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. I think if we're not listening, first of all, we're not going to be able to provide person-centered, trauma-informed, evidence-based, strength-focused care. And that's the number one rule, is that I have to listen. I have to meet people where they are. I have to really be open to hearing them. And with that, there's a fine line between enabling and empowering someone in regards to all aspects of care. I think when you're talking about inclusion, diversity, we've met diversity. You know, we're a melting pot. We've got that checked off. You've got to, from there, you've got to, which promotes fairness. But that comes with understanding the root causes of disparity. And inclusion is the outcome. It's only met when the organization, the care is truly inviting or truly accessible to all. And we're not there yet. We don't need another policy. I think we need to focus on creating the culture. Just about everybody has a DEI buzzword policy, a flyer, a training program. But if the culture doesn't match those words, they're just words on paper. They're just another policy. We've got to act.
And just to chime in on what you mentioned about the culture, I think it's so important, like you said, that the culture has to live. It can't just live on paper because it does nobody any good. And the patients can see that when they walk in and the medical staff that they're meeting does not match the culture that is advertised. It deters people. They don't want to be in those facilities, and then we
Where
can't.
no one looks like them.
Yes, they don't want to be a part of something like that. So then they miss out on the care that they could be getting because the culture doesn't match.
Right. One of the things I sometimes do, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, maybe I don't always address issues head on, but what I'll do is I'll try and figure out what is it we all want. And in our office, the two pinnacle issues are excellent patient care and excellent education for our resident physicians. So we kind of focus on those and then say, how do we get there and what's getting in our way? In that way, we can address, okay, so we have an office full of white males. How is that hindering not only our process of educating, but also delivering care, and just kind of getting it back from there. So we all agree on the end point, and then we can just back it down and say, what's getting in our way, recognizing that, what can we do about it? And I think that de-escalates some of those conversations, or at least some of the energy sometimes, at least in my experience, as saying, we're just dealing with them in an objective manner. We need more women physicians. We need more people of color. And the people of color shouldn't all be the people just who are, answering our phones or being our CNAs. We need those people of color, the women, in areas of leadership. Again, not only for patient care, it enhances patient care, it enhances our ability to educate. So again, using it as kind of a footstool, a foothold into that conversation, just to say, this is how we get there. This is what we need to do to achieve that goal that we all agree is important.
Bob, I really like what you said about really making that commitment and then putting things in motion. We started an LVN to RN apprenticeship program really in underserved areas and rural areas so we could make that commitment. And it was so successful. Now we're moving into a pre-apprenticeship program. We want our potential new employees, right, to be able to be competitive and get into the program in the first place. We need to make that second commitment. So really moving that into motion is so important, really, to show the commitment and the culture that you're trying to create.
Yes, the community is full of jewels. We need more workforce pipelines that target people in the community to get into the healthcare industry and helping them remove barriers to do that. Catching them as high school students who are interested in healthcare, people relocating to the area, people who are interested in healthcare but have background issues, cannot get clearance or exemption status from ACA. Things like that matters. And if there is a company that is willing to help eliminate those barriers or dispel the myths of you can't be in healthcare because of this, or you can't qualify for a clinical position because of this, we need to help cultivate them until they're ready. People will invest in themselves if you show them how to do it. I tell my patients all the time, my job is to teach you how to fish so that if I am not available tomorrow, you are still able to eat.
Exactly.
If I do it for you, you won't maintain it, you won't sustain it. But if I show you, if I empower you to be able to do it for yourself, that's lasting. That's what matters.
Right. I was listening into the conversation before this session. Some great comments there. And some people were saying, common comment or objection is, where are these people? How do we find them? And one of the conversations as part of that discussion was, one of the things you have to do is maybe change how you look for these people. in medical education, in residency training, you look for the brightest people with the highest scores, that got the A's. Not too long ago, our program director made a very intentional decision, basically for the people who are interviewing candidates for our program, to white out their board scores in the interview information, the packets that she gave to the people who are interviewing. Basically with the idea of, that's important. I mean, you need bright people to be good physicians, but good physicians are so much more than a board score. And so I think what she did was try and change that dynamic to say, I'm going to force you to look at broader areas, to ask different questions, rather than just say, well, this guy scored 10 points higher, they must be a better candidate. And I was encouraged by that, and very pleased. Just the idea of, how do we find these people? I think we have to ask different questions, and look for different skill sets than maybe we traditionally have been. And again, in medicine, that's a big boat to start turning around in a corner, because it just doesn't happen easily. So we're starting to nibble on the edges a little bit.
Yeah, and passion is one of those things that you can't really measure. It can't be cultivated. It has to be outsourced. It has to be located.
Right.
Absolutely. Thank you. I feel like, Bob, you've helped us transition to another topic, so thank you for that. I know that maybe you didn't intend to do so, but thanks. You were talking about looking for new talent, right, or specific talent, thinking about how to hire and who to bring on board. And I guess I'm just wondering, from our entire panel, I guess thinking about hiring practices or onboarding, training policies and things like that, how are diversity, equity, and inclusion practices factored into that? Is it something that's just on a piece of paper, as Leah Renee and Lanisha mentioned earlier, or are there purposeful strategies in place, and how has that evolved over the last couple of years?
I think Lanisha also, again, made a great point about just how you can't, like, passion is just something that people have. I mean, you can't really teach somebody to be passionate about something. It's just something that's within. And when it comes to hiring and looking at DEI and all of that, sometimes you just gotta see people's passion for what it is and look at other areas. Like, I can teach this, but the passion is there. And I think a lot of people get discouraged in the hiring process because they don't feel like they're enough or they meet the standards. But then that passion is there. And it's like, can I teach them this and let their passion, like that burn, like just go on? Or do you bypass them? So I think it's important to factor in passion when you look at the hiring process.
Absolutely.
We use a couple different strategies here that have been very successful. And one is to partner with our HR department and get out there and actually help recruit, as well as the workforce development. So we attend a lot of recruitment fairs, a lot of colleges, a lot of mock interviews. We have about 7,000 nurses, a little over in our CCHCS, and my team up here over nursing professional practice, we make that connection. We took advantage in the respect that COVID didn't allow for a lot of clinical hours that were needed in the colleges. So we provided a virtual one because we have the whole continuum of mental health, and what a great way, right, to share and highlight what we do. We take clinical rotations into the prisons. It sounds crazy. It's an awesome, exceptional environment because it's not something you normally would think of on if you're outside of corrections. What does it look like? Because there's a great deal of autonomy here. So we have to use a multitude of tools, whether it's the community reaching out, like I said, to the colleges, the universities, what that looks like, working with workforce development. It's just so important. And then, of course, we're recruiting all the time. We'll go speak to someone, we'll tap into needs, and then HR having that link so they understand the clinical need you have, and it's not just a person. And no fear to hire a new grad. I can train you. We can give you the tools that you need to be successful, and really trying to encircle that employee and get what they need. And getting out to the rural areas where those folks normally don't have a chance, like with the LVN to RN, our grant gives them wraparound services so they can actually travel, stay, study, and then come back to their workplace. Meanwhile, they still can feed their family because they're earning and learning. So we try to think outside the box in that respect, and it allows them, they're still earning their benefits, they're supporting their family, and they're going to school. So we've just tried to kind of wrap around it in a multitude of ways and use those tools.
Absolutely. I wanted to circle back real quick. I see Steve has a really great question, and I think that relates to this conversation specifically, and especially what Leah Renee was talking about a bit ago. How do we hold the industry accountable so that DEI does not just exist on paper and is actually truly part of the live culture?
I think we continue to shine a light on it. These are not new concepts, but the awareness, leveraging technology, social media is new, fairly new still. And we have to keep holding people accountable and recording, going live, being aware, using our voice, being an advocate for others, being empathetic. I mean, 70% of adults in the US alone have experienced some type of trauma or traumatic event once in their lifetime. If we led from that understanding that the people that we are dealing with, serving, working for, working with, all have, I mean, that's over 223 million people. We need to start having the conversations that impact people from that standpoint. Be more compassionate, be more empathetic, and shine a light. Hold people accountable. When something's not right, say it's not right, and tell everybody you run into that, and keep the conversation going. Don't let it be live for a little bit and then die down. That's not progressive. That's not productive. It has to remain at the forefront. It has to be a constant hot topic, or it's not going to go away. It's not going to be reduced. It's not going to be impacted at all.
Thank you.
So well said. I appreciate that so much, because I think it's so important. And a lot of it is education along the way, but like you said, also holding people accountable. We went to a zero tolerance policy for bullying and actually put it out there. That was kind of an interesting, way to say to our whole organization, we will hold you accountable, right? But educating at the same time and opening that conversation. So I really appreciate what you just shared.
And I think a lot of that happens, or can happen, informally. Just conversations you have with people. What you value, what you don't. And it's really easy to say, and I have nothing against a zero tolerance for bullying. Absolutely. I love that. But in a way, and I don't want to minimize this or make it sound silly, but in a way, it's kind of like parenting. Catch someone doing something good, especially in our center where we have students, resident physicians. So often, you say, well, this is what you could do better. And that's part of learning. And that's part of the process. But I think it's also encouraging for us to say, hey, I saw you in the hall with that patient. You did a really good job, just walking them back to the room and chatting with them. And by the time you got in the room, they were already kind of comfortable with you. Good job. Something like that. It doesn't take any extra training. It certainly doesn't take a whole lot of extra time. But just having those informal conversations, especially when you're someone like me that has somewhat of an authoritative, a role of authority in the program, it carries some weight. And so over the years, I've learned to use that, hopefully in a positive way, just to encourage. And again, it's informal, it's below the radar. It certainly complies with all the policies, but it's not really a political statement or anything other than just a conversation.
Yeah, I work for a lady who, she only gave me criticism.
Yeah.
And never told me what I did well. That followed me from job to job until I finally got with a boss who provided both ways that I can improve the care that I'm providing, things I did well, things I didn't. It has to be both. It's that age-old customer service. Like if someone has a good experience, they'll maybe tell one person. If they have a bad experience, they're going to tell everybody. It's things like that work in this facet too.
Right.
That is so true. Thank you, Lanisha. I was wondering if there were any additional comments about the hiring practices, and I guess specific to that, and I mean this whole conversation, right, is what is going to be the need as we move forward, right? So whether it's a training need or what we're going to be looking for in new talent, so that again, so DEI doesn't just exist on paper, so that we can, foster that inclusivity from the very beginning, and it's just part of the culture. Are there any other comments that you wanted to add to that?
I mean, I think I shared how we kind of reach out to the underserved areas and some of those things, but also too at the line level through shared governance and some of the other things that we practice is really listening to the folks who are down there on the line and what they need and what they're not seeing. Sometimes, you sit up here, as they say, in the glass house and you miss those points, having those open conversations and making sure. I mean, with 34 institutions, we really have to reach out and get personal. If we're going to help you remove some of these barriers, we really have to know what you're feeling there. I think it's so important.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think one of the things I do is over the years, I kind of established myself here in the program, and that's given me a lot of security. But one of the things I will do is, when one of our clients is prospective resident physicians, we interview who's going to come into our program, and so one of the things I'll do is I'll look at things that other people just don't, and I'll ask questions. It's kind of like, here we got this person who has a 3.7 average, but did you notice that they got a C in their psych rotation? What's going on with that? How come one of the more interpersonal rotation skill sets, they almost failed? What's going on here? Or part of the application process of personal interest statement. I love those things. People say something like, I'm first generation college graduate. That's the kind of people we want around. People who really value, who appreciate, who understand what it takes to get to a certain level, not only as a physician, but as a patient, who can empathize on a different level. And nothing against, the third generation physician. My dad, my grandfather, my mom, aunt, whatever, we're all physicians. Wonderful background, but it's a different story. And when we're having the conversations regarding, how do we want to match these people, just raising those kind of questions and interjecting. And again, it's not necessarily a policy statement, but it's just someone in the back of the room saying, hey, did anyone notice that C in psychiatry?
Thank you. All right, I think I wanted to move on to another topic, and that is of empathy. I feel like that's been brought up quite a bit in various sessions here in the last couple of days, and it's definitely been on folks' mind for the last couple of years especially. It's definitely sort of a foundational element of the University of Phoenix as well. So I wanted to chat a little bit about that. I guess share your thoughts about empathy as it relates to you personally, maybe how it's sort of informed or changed your leadership practice. And I guess any advice that you have for emerging leaders or current leaders in regards to empathy and adding that to their daily practice.
I'll start. Oh, go ahead, Renee.
Okay.
Renee.
I'll just say that empathy and the way that I practice it is just being open and understanding of other people's feelings. When I worked in the hospital setting, when people came in, I met them where they were, and I may not all the way agree with what's going on, but I showed that I cared. Like, you're not just another face coming through the door. We truly want to help you and understand where you're coming from so we can help you in the best way possible. And being empathetic is the first way to help a patient or anybody you come in contact with. Is just trying to understand where they are and how you can meet them there and help build them back up to where they need to be or want to be, for that matter.
I love that you said that, Leah. People have to have autonomy in their own care. They have to be able to make their own informed decisions about their health, their life. Um, Being empathetic is that understanding of, okay, this is where you are. Where do you want to be? Here? Great. I am guiding and assisting you to get there. I think that I may not uh, agree with your choices, your lifestyle, your anything, but I can certainly be compassionate and, because perception is reality to that person. That's what impacts the personal experiences, which are their reality. But that doesn't mean that everything people feel is factual. Feelings are not fact. But if that feels real to you, great. Let's address it. What do you want to do with it? What do you want to do about it? And then I'm guiding and assisting you with that.
I think that's so important. I know for empathy, I really believe it's like the core of healthcare. We have to be able to put ourselves there and understand, like you said, Leah Renee, where they're coming from. And it's also a good indicator of the kind of quality that we're doing. So people have to be able to embrace that and kind of stand in that truth, if you will, and meet the patient, like you were saying before, Lenisha, where they are. We have to meet you where you are. And in corrections, we're in their house. And it comes with a lot of personal bias sometimes taking care of these folks. And it's so important that we make that human connection. And then we have to do some introspective work as well and work as an organization to really kind of support that. Because in corrections, it's a paramilitary organization and it's a very disciplinary organization. And we're here for the health and well-being of our patients. So, you're taking quite a different stance, right? And so educating and building up that trust and respect so then we can take care of that whole person. And like you were saying, Lenisha, people come to certain points of care that they want at different times in their lives and different events they've been through, just like those who are sitting on the other side caring for them. So it's just such a core principle in what we do.
I don't know that I'm still trying to decide if empathy can be taught. I certainly believe it can be encouraged and fostered and promoted. And I think that kind of goes into the hierarchy of an organization also. When I model it, it's kind of like, well, yeah, Dr. Z, you're the social worker. We expect that anyway. No big surprise there. But we currently have a departmental chair who models it as well. And I think that very much gives permission to folks to empathize, to talk about struggles, weaknesses, having personal feelings, for patient care, as opposed to just being the stoic, medical provider. I don't know how you provide that. I think we're very fortunate to have that. But again, I think one of the things, part of our role now is we are training the physician leaders of tomorrow. So maybe we can't change the current situation, but we can start at the bottom and hopefully encourage and train people to see things differently or allow them to do that. So 5, 10, 15 years from now, when they're stepping into those leadership positions, hopefully they have the courage, the willingness to do that. And part of that is allowing them to do it now and saying it's okay.
I agree, Bob. I think that empathy is not an innate thing. I think it must be nurtured, cultivated. I think we are selfish people. We're, a selfish society. I think the goal is to think of ourselves less, not less of ourselves. Support and advocate for other people. I think the more we do that, the more we listen, the more we try to understand and be willing and open to do that, the better the future leaders and patients and clients will be for it.
Thank you. I think that's so important. I wanted to circle back to something that you said, Lenisha, regarding folks' perception as their reality. I think that's incredibly important. So I just wanted to ask the panel if you could discuss your experiences or what you think are the differences between perceived versus actual barriers, and what does that mean for DEI efforts? what does that mean for leaders, whether it's now or moving forward, as Bob said, sort of growing a new generation of future leaders that are more empathetic and whatnot. So what does that mean? Because there is a difference between perceived and actual barriers. So what does that mean for us as we move forward?
I think we have to listen, going back to meeting the person where they're at. If they don't see, let's just use drinking. If they don't see their drinking as a problem, it's not a problem. We're going to move on to something else. If there's a smoker and last week they were smoking a pack a day and now they're smoking a half a pack, progress. We're going to celebrate that. It may not make sense to me. I may not agree, but that's their perception. That's their reality. And so that's what we're going to focus on. It is encouraging and it's hopeful to people to have someone celebrate those little successes, no matter how insignificant or how obtruse I think it is. It's not about me. It's about the person.
I would have to add for perception, I think it's kind of interesting because sometimes perception for someone in a barrier is a gap in knowledge. The perception may or may not be true. So sometimes that's a knowledge field to decide if that perception stays. And the other part of that is actually looking at it to see if there's some merit to it as well on our side. Because if it's perceived to them, it's obviously extremely important. So can we dispel the myth or fill the gap? Or indeed, is it something they perceive? Because we're not going to achieve some of those other goals if we don't deal with what that perception, that priority is to that person.
Sharon, and like you're saying, they might perceive the barrier to be there, and that gives us the opportunity to educate them if there is that gap. Especially in the healthcare system, there are a lot of perceived barriers, especially when it comes to seeking the care that people need. People in lower income areas may perceive certain hospitals to be out of reach for them. Like, I can't get the care I need there because there's nobody who looks like me there. Well, when you hear things like that, that's an opportunity to educate somebody and say, hey, like they have great systems and people in place to help you with X, Y, and Z. No matter what you look like, we're here to help you. So just using our platform to be able to educate people and, again, meet them where they are, because a lot of times they don't know any better. It's ignorance, and we can help fix that.
I agree, Leah. They say ignorance is bliss. Nope, it's just ignorance.
Yeah.
Do something about that ignorance. That's how we move forward. That's how we right some of these wrongs. That's how we dispel these myths. That's how we eliminate these barriers, is by educating. Knowledge is definitely power, and it cannot be taken away.
Maybe a little off track, but I know a lot of institutions, ours is no exception. What we're trying to do is increase minorities, hiring positions. And so what we're trying to do is check a box. Oh, we went from 5% to 15% minority status in this department. I'm not saying that's bad, but that's kind of an external, tip of the iceberg sort of thing. It may be a good start, but that's not, I don't know if that's real change or not. And call me on that one if that doesn't sound correct, but it's just such a struggle to say, we have more minorities on staff, on our faculty, in our department, and therefore we're meeting the goal. I don't know that we are. And maybe this is the start of the discussion. Yeah, Lanisha, please.
You can meet the goal and still miss the mark. If you are just hiring people of color just to say that you checked the box and that you've added 3 more people of color into your staff roster, but the culture is still one of which is not inclusive, you've missed the mark.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree too. And we have a duty to circle around any employee and make them feel comfortable, right? You certainly don't want someone to come and like Leah Renee was talking about earlier, you know, there's no one there that looks like me. We have to support our staff and our patients, be it either side, right? So that we make that door open and they get the tools that they need to be successful. Otherwise, like you said, Lanisha, we're just meeting a mark.
Yeah.
We're not missing the mark, meeting the
Quota.
Right.
Yeah.
Or hire the person and marginalize them and then say, why can't we keep anyone?
But, you know, when we talk about inclusion, it's so important that, you know, not only they talk about not only just being at the table, but making the dinner, right? So you can't just hire folks and then meet that quota like you're talking about. We have to be involved in making those policies and changing our organization that way, or it will never happen. You may be dealing with diversity, but you're not dealing with inclusion. So if we don't get to the heart of the matter and get down there at that base, we're not going to change anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we're bringing people on to check those boxes, but then we're keeping them where they're at. We're not giving them opportunities to grow and to develop into leadership positions. So they're able to facilitate and keep that culture burning and growing of hiring people that look like them. Employers want to hire people that they like, that look like them. But if we don't diversify that process, it's going to be more of the same. It's going to be a continuum. But when we bring people of color in and we are diverse and inclusive, we have to give those people opportunities to move up into leadership positions, not just keep them at the base level just for show. That's a facade that a lot of organizations put on under the guise of DEI. But it goes.
I think oh, go ahead, Bob.
Lanisha, you reminded me of a comment in the earlier session. One of the persons said, one of those speakers was talking about, we need to be comfortable feeling uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And that I suppose it's a thought I had, I just never quite put it into good words. But just being okay with the idea that sometimes I'm just going to be uncomfortable, and that's not a bad thing.
Right. I think that, sure. Bob, I think that's really important, the idea of being uncomfortable or being comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that that really gets to the heart of what it means to be willing to engage in reciprocal learning, right? You are learning from someone, and that might mean that you are uncomfortable doing so because you don't know, right? And just being okay with the fact, I don't know, but somebody does, and they will definitely educate me. The other thing I think was interesting in listening to all of you speak, I think it's fantastic, is that original question I asked you a few minutes ago was about barriers and perceived versus actual barriers, right? And I think that early on when we started discussing, we were talking about, clients or community or patients don't want to go to a hospital, for example, when nobody looks like them. That's absolutely correct, right? Although the same barriers exist with regard to perceived barriers from leadership at organizations too, right? They have perceived barriers of what it's like to bring in people that don't look like them, for example. And so there is an educational opportunity, I think, that sort of meets in the middle. And that is where I think that all of the things we've talked about so far today, the open dialogue, right? And the being comfortable, I keep saying the wrong thing. You know what I mean? Being comfortable being uncomfortable is really sort of the heart of that. So I think that this is such great conversation. I absolutely love this. So thank you for that.
Being comfortable is how we grow, how we are developed. I think a lot of times people of color in the workplace, we are tasked with making you feel better because you're uncomfortable about having this conversation. It's not my responsibility, but it's both of our duties to learn from each other and educate each other, have these uncomfortable conversations. But because you are uncomfortable, I'm not going to placate you. I am not going to assume the responsibility of being the their person because you're uncomfortable having this conversation. That's not how changes happen. We've got to get down and dirty. We've got to have these really, really sandpaper conversations to move forward. That's progression.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, if I may, Cindy, let me turn the tables a little bit.
Okay.
As an older white guy, having these uncomfortable conversations, that's something I have to do very intentional. I have to step into them. I have to be comfortable with them. I have to sit with them. It doesn't come naturally at all. Is that different for you younger ladies? Does it come more naturally? Is it just a part of my cohort, or is that something we all struggle with? I would just like to know.
I wouldn't say it comes naturally, but we've been having these kinds of conversations all of our lives.
Okay.
As a Black woman, we're literally at the bottom of the totem pole. We come after Black males, white women, and white men.
White males, yeah.
So I've been having these conversations. I've been groomed by my mother, her mother, with these kind of situations my whole life. This isn't new to me. This is my life. These are my experiences that I've had to thwart at every turn to make sure that I am counted, I am heard, I advocate for myself, I make sure I'm included, I make sure I seek out opportunities, because a lot of times I was the only person of color or Black girl in my class, at my job a lot of times. And so there was no one I could vent to, I could have these conversations with. They were not willing to have them, but I've already been pre-practicing my whole life. Every stage, every level that I've advanced to, it's because I had to initiate the conversation. That's got to stop. We've got to all assume that duty.
I can agree, Lanisha. Just speaking from being a woman of color, I believe that we are groomed early on how to deal with people. And in the society we live in now, it's almost to the point where it's like, why do I have to make you comfortable in a situation where I was uncomfortable first? You made me uncomfortable, and now I recognize that you are uncomfortable. And now I feel like, because I was groomed in a sense to turn the tables and, oh, now it's you, because we're having this tough conversation. Let me water it down for you so you can feel comfortable, so we can get through it.
Right. But we choked it down.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's got to stop. We've got to have those uncomfortable conversations. People have to be willing, Bob, and open to have these intentional conversations. It can't just be a one-day training that gets everybody in the conference room with lunch, where people, as soon as it's over, the culture goes right back to the same before. That can't happen. That's not helpful to anyone.
And Lanisha, I think we have such a big responsibility. When you and Leah Renee were talking about that, a lot of times organizations have that one-day training, or once a year you go, right? And when you round the corner and you hear those smaller conversations, you need to step in. As leaders, we can't just stand by and watch that, that side conversation, the side looks, the rest, and let it go. It's like engaging throughout that year, not to tolerate it, to have that conversation and to keep that moving forward. Otherwise, we just go back to that yearly thing because we're checking off a box, right? And really not learning and changing our culture like we need to.
Thank you. We have some questions from our audience, which I think are really interesting, and I want to get to those. But I also wanted to answer your question, Bob, because I am not a person of color, but I am female. And so I have felt, uncomfortable in various settings before. One of which is, I think I might have mentioned this in my introduction, but I think really the heart and sort of what drove me in my career was starting my career in Baltimore City, where I was the only person who was white, and I really did have to learn from everybody else, and get accepted and gain trust and all of that, have open conversations where it's like, I am uncomfortable, but that's okay, because otherwise there's no way that we can relate. Right. And I think that needs to be intentional. And I think part of where that comes from, at least for me, is being aware of my own bias, right? And who I am. And yes, I'm female. I understand what it's like to be on the bottom if compared to males, for example, right? And to be uncomfortable in positions based on that. But I'm also aware that I'm white. Right. So I think being aware of one's own personal self and your own bias, I think, is it's it's important and necessary in order to feel comfortable being uncomfortable, if you will. I did want to ask a couple of questions that the audience has sent, because we have some really good ones. We have a question from Gabriella, and she wanted to know what the conversation looked like for Bob when you say, or what do you say when you get pushback from your white colleagues, right? So, you've talked about how you're trying to be intentional and you are sitting with being uncomfortable. And I think that's fantastic. Thank you for doing that. But what happens when you get pushback from your colleagues?
Couple quick thoughts. Number one, again, I'm a social worker in a medical facility. So it's real easy for them to just kind of put it off as to, well, you're the social worker, that's your job. Like social workers are supposed to be empathic and physicians don't have that same requirement. So one of the things I try and do is kind of come back with the conversation of, well, now wait a minute. That's not just an occupational issue. I think, and to kind of bring it back to, well, why isn't that the norm? What about it is not correct? And to try and turn it around a little bit in that way. Not sure that's a good answer to the question. I'm still kind of thinking it through as I'm talking. I think maybe part of it, can go back to what I was saying earlier, and I hope I don't sound like I'm ducking the issue, but just bringing it back to, so what is our goal here? What is it we are trying to accomplish? And are you saying that your way works better than mine? Or could I maybe suggest to you that if you were to incorporate some of what you say is a social work skill set into your physician persona, that may not be to your benefit? And hopefully kind of demonstrate, model some of that. Again, I can do that, but I'm at somewhat of a disadvantage as opposed to a physician colleague of mine being asked the same question. I try and do my best, but end of the day, I'm not one of them. And I have to recognize that and work with that.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. I have another question from an audience member. How do you have some of these conversations for those in positions to make change, but they don't want to hear about it or talk about it? So I think this is related to where you were headed, Bob, but I guess, more globally than that, and Sharon and Lanisha, how do we have these conversations with folks that could change it, but don't want to talk about it?
I'll start if you don't mind, Lanisha. A lot of times I really like to, healthcare is like a data-driven metric kind of thing, right? And I like to start with our mission and vision. What's our purpose here in the first place? And what are we missing when you are not inclusive and we're not looking at these issues and what we need to do? So I tend to like to review that mission, vision, where we're here, why we're here, and then talk about the demographics, our purpose, what some of the data looks like, and how we could really help our patients if we address it like we should.
Thank you.
I think for me, if I have been hired to work in your organization, there should be no one I can't talk to. There should be no one that I can't ask a question to. I can bounce ideas off of. Those are the kind of organizations that I want to be a part of. If there's someone not willing to hear me out or talk about change, then that doesn't line up with your vision, and I'm in the wrong place, and you are too.
Excuse me. I want to preface my next comment by saying I have no intention of being subversive. I do not want to undermine anyone's authority, but there can be times when I can find people in our organization who may be thinking along the same lines as I do, and we can get together and talk. And we may not be able to make policy statements, but we can encourage different treatments, different activities, different goals, to kind of formalize that. Not too long ago, there were several people in our department who said, we need to move forward in getting more active training in ultrasound. There was a minority at the beginning, But as the technology changed, as the obvious patient care advantages changed, I mean, it became a groundswell that made a change for the department. And now basically everyone has to have the training in ultrasound technology. And it didn't come from the top down. And again, I don't want to sound subversive, but sometimes positive changes can come from the ground up. And just encouraging people to see it, to collaborate, to behave in different ways, to demonstrate on their own advantages in a way that kind of develop a momentum of their own. That may be another option.
I think people in leadership positions like to say, well, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. You should be able to too. Well, what if I don't have boots? What if I don't have straps? Help me, give me a chance, give me the opportunity, cultivate me. If you care about this organization, it's not the people at the top who are doing the work. It's the people who have their feet on the ground. You have to listen to the little guys. You have to be open to the conversation from the people who are, doing the actual work, who are not just in meetings all day, but who are actually implementing those policies, those changes on the day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. But part of me sometimes wants to say, well, thank you very much, John Wayne. But as Americans, that's who many of us are. I mean, that's an American culture. That's the air most of us breathe. And it's hard to confront that one.
Absolutely. I want to move on to another question from our audience, if that's okay. We have an audience member that said, thank you for the discussion. Healthcare has gone through and is going through a lot of stress. How do we give empathy to our employees so that they can in turn be empathetic in providing care?
That is a wonderful, immense question. Granting the grace to each other to have that empathy and really let them have their space. I mean, I can just speak from a nursing perspective there with COVID, exhausted. People were just exhausted. And in a correctional facility, you can't just reach out and grab a travel nurse, right? You have to understand what you're doing for safety and security. So just the empathy that we needed to share with one another and the respect for what we do. And it just took people taking turns with that, because as one person's experiencing something and walking through, they're in a different space and the person's not there yet. So it just embracing others. We got a lot of embrace from the community, which was so helpful. But reminding you're not the only one standing in that's going through it, right? So it's a tough subject, but it's so important. And I think we, as leaders, have a really duty to make sure that we give that space for that and that we role model that. It's just so important.
Thank you.
I think we need to encourage each other to practice self-care, mindfulness, just like we would tell our patients, our clients. We need that as well. I start every day with my big three. I do something for myself, do something for work or tied to my career goals, my passions, and do something for home, not just my physical home, my emotional home too, my family, people I care about, people I love. But if I have not done for number one, I don't do for 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. I just don't. Because more often, in the past, I was a list checker offer. I had all these things I wanted to accomplish in the day, and if I didn't check them all off, I would totally freak out. But I can't do that anymore. I can't afford to do that anymore. That's too costly. That led to burnout. It impacted my work. It impacted my clients. So now I am no longer doing things from a place of leftover care, leftover energy. I'm getting mine off the top, and I'm doing and providing services and care from a place of wholeness, rather than, getting all the things done and then hoping there's time after to take care of me. I've switched that around, and now I'm doing things from a place of wholeness, and I'm providing better quality care because I'm doing it from a place of wholeness.
I'd like to build on what Lanisha says. I agree totally. Wellness and learning how to encourage ourselves to do that is wonderful. I had a bit of a problem several years ago when it seemed like the whole idea of wellness depended on physicians becoming more resilient or providers becoming more resilient. And it's kind of like, wait a minute, I understand, I agree that's part of the equation, but it's kind of like we're working in environments that are increasingly demanding, increasingly toxic oftentimes. And to say that, well, physicians, providers, nurses, front desk staff, they just need to be more resilient is not getting to the answer. So I think we need to look at both sides of that equation. One of the things, I've been having some fun lately with a physician who's in charge of our clinical practice. Electronic medical record, if you're familiar with just the documentation requirements of medical practice now, they are just becoming increasingly onerous. And what we decided was, if we could help our resident physicians in particular become more efficient with their documentation at the end of the day, and if we could help them save 3 minutes on each patient care that they had to document at the end of the day. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but if they had 10 patients, we just got them home a half hour earlier. That's a big deal. That's wellness. So we kind of got outside the box as far as how we defined wellness, to say some of it can be responses to administrative issues as well. I agree, the internal stuff is where it starts. But that doesn't mean that we can't also say, wait a minute, guys, we're getting beat up here. And we need to fight back on the administrative level and try and deal with that as well, and kind of get both sides of that equation.
Thank you. I have another question from our audience. Keith asks us, most of this discussion has been walking around finding good communication practices. Does someone have a suggestion on how to get past the emotion and develop a good practice to handle these items, and remembering that we don't have unlimited time to begin this process?
I think that's a great question. I know in one of the institutions that I had the pleasure to work at was a very large medical facility with a lot of different inpatient areas, a lot of different mental health areas. Kind of as a leader, you always are watching your dashboard and your metrics, but looking at who's going through the heavier toll at the moment, right? And making sure I schedule time in my day to visit those areas. That way I can have a one-on-one or take a look and really lay eyes on someone and see how they're doing. So if I had that protected time, I knew I can at least touch base, because as you said, we all do have some crazy schedules and a lot of responsibilities. So making sure it was a regular basis and I had that protected time was a big help.
Thank you.
Don't know if this answers your question, Keith. I mentioned in the introduction that several years ago, I was made an assistant program director, which increased my administrative duties. And in the year or so after that, I recognized I was spending more time in my office than I used to, and less time out in the clinical care area. And you're right, time is a zero-sum game. None of us have enough of it to do everything we want to do, everything we'd like to do, what our boss expects us to do. But I guess at that point I had to make a decision, what was most important. Not that I could ignore the administrative stuff, but it seemed like it was taking more time than it deserved, at least in my value equation. Again, not sure if that answered your question. Some of it's just making decisions as to how you use your time. Sorry, I don't know how to say that better.
Lanisha, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think in regards to good communication practices, definitely use I statements. I like the think way of doing things. Before I open my mouth, is it true? What is it? How does it? Is it true? What's the H stand for? Is it necessary, kind? I'll look for it. But those things matter when you're talking about heavy subjects. Everything that comes in my head, I'm the first to hear before I let it come out of my mouth. So usually a deep breath before you speak, and then just think, is what I'm about to say, is it going to add to this conversation? Is it going to progress the conversation? Is it going to derail the conversation? Or is it going to lead to the desired outcome?
It's great advice.
Thank you. Bob or Sharon, did you have anything else to add to the communication piece? outside of time management, the best way to communicate or
I was just thinking of the whole idea of getting past the emotion. Sometimes you can't. And you just need to try and address that in a way that may be helpful. Kind of back to Lanisha's acronym, and just saying, wow, so we're in a tough place right now. And maybe what we need to do is, come back to it, address it a different way, or just say, it sounds like we're coming from this from a different place. Help me understand where you're coming from. Again, don't know if that's helping you, Keith, but sometimes you can't get past it and you can't ignore it. And to do so, it may not be helpful. And sometimes you just have to agree agree to disagree and say, maybe we just can't have this discussion right now.
I really like what you both said. I think it's so important, especially when it's emotionally charged like that. Also to watch your body language, because I like how, Anisha, you were saying, you really got to take the time and think of what's coming out of your mouth, but be careful what you're showing in the interim. And you may just say, like you said, Bob, I need a minute. Either let me ground myself here for a minute, we can have this conversation, or maybe now's not the time. But, those things make a difference to someone think you even listening to them in the first place. And I like, Lanisha, when you opened up about you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? You really need to stop and listen. It's just so important. Sometimes you miss the point completely because you're so quick to judge and respond.
Or I'm thinking about my answer before I heard the whole question. Yeah.
Yeah, don't just listen to respond, listen to understand.
Yeah, I'm good at that.
Sure. When I think about this question and communication, I think about, we're talking about being uncomfortable, right? That typically makes people have some sort of bioreaction, right? You are potentially in a state of fight or flight, right? And I think being aware of how you are feeling and how you are communicating with others during that time is really important. I'm personally someone who believes that everyone is doing the absolute best they can at any given moment with the resources and circumstances that they are currently present, right? If they are not communicating well, they're probably not doing so good. And I'm personally aware of that. And I try to sort of hold on to that, especially when you're in a situation and you're feeling uncomfortable, and maybe having some type of bioreaction yourself, and being able to sort of take a breath, have some empathy for how that other person might feel. Maybe they would have some empathy for you as well, so that you can sort of meet on a common ground. Maybe that common ground is discomfort, but nonetheless, common ground.
Thank you, Cindy. I think I needed to hear that too.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Okay, I sort of wanted to get back to another question that we had from earlier, actually, from Karen, and she had asked the panel, the recent nurse that was convicted of a patient's death set a precedent. How do you think the industry will manage that going forward?
Oh, that's a question my group has talked about quite a bit, right? And it's interesting because we embrace just culture in our system. So we've done very well with building trust with our employees to be able to report things. And that's a concern of ours. Will they still be as willing? So we have a lot of discussions around that right now. And how do we still support just culture and keep that trust going amongst our employees so they feel comfortable? We'll never keep improving our patient outcomes if folks aren't willing to come forward. So it's an interesting. I've seen nurses leave the profession. That's been kind of interesting to watch. So it's quite a hot conversation at the moment. In the state of California, incarcerated person has the authority to sue you as well. So that's always been obviously forefront here. So we have a lot of those discussions, but this precedent is quite, I won't say impressive. I think that's the wrong word, but concerning, and really is quite a large precedent for the practice of nursing.
I think it's chilling. It really makes you pause.
Yeah, if you think about Black maternal mortality rates on the rise, it's because there's still medical professionals that believe we are not as in pain as we are communicating that we are. We're not being heard. We're not being taken seriously. I wish I had the statistic, but there's still a great deal of medical professionals that truly believe that, and that's just ridiculous. If I say that I'm in pain, listen. If you won't listen, I have to be able to advocate for myself, yes, but you have to be willing to get another opinion. You have to be able to consult with other medical professionals, because the buck doesn't stop with you just saying, I disagree. You have to listen to me. It's your practice, but it's my care.
I would have to also answer additionally to this particular question, that it's really a responsibility of nurse leaders too, to make sure, especially coming out of the pandemic and staffing shortages, that we have a safe environment for our nurses to practice, that they have the time to be able to go through the safety checks and things that are there, and not let our folks, bypass a standard safety issue because they're rushed to do so, or someone's waiting at the bedside, or whatever the combination may be. So I think that's really important for us as nursing leaders to stand up and make sure we give them that space and make sure we address those kind of barriers.
I really think that's critically important, Sharon. One of the things in a variety of professions recently, I've kind of been struck by is some of us, like myself, I've been in the profession for a long time. A lot of things kind of come second nature, and it's easy to get a little careless. And I guess I'm pointing a finger directly at myself here. And things, as unfortunate as they are, like that nursing example, it's a real wake-up call to say, hey, wait a minute, we are professionals. If you talk to my undergraduate students, they'll laugh when they hear me talk about professionalism. That's kind of one of my mantras. But we're professionals that have responsibilities, and we can't take them lightly. And I think what you mentioned is another area where it's just that much more difficult to do that well, and to stand up as a professional and say, this is what's required of me for this individual. And I'm sorry if I can't get to everyone. And I understand overwork and how that happens. And there isn't an easy answer. I mean, to say, well, I'm going to spend 10 minutes with this patient means I've got 5 minutes less to spend with someone else. And how is that being professional? You can argue that all different ways. But I think the bottom line is, as physicians, as social workers, as nurses, as police officers, we have professional standards that are expected of us, and that's tough, and it's real.
Right. The standards the standards exist. They are there, but does the culture align with those standards? Does what is actually put into practice, does that align with what we are being taught, what we know is right? No.
Yeah.
We get in this good old boy syndrome where I am the law, whether it's in law enforcement or healthcare. I'm the law in this town. Do as I say, not as I do. All those things don't line up.
Right.
And that's what keeps this going. That's what keeps perpetuating these racial disparities, these healthcare issues that make it harder for me to trust healthcare professionals, seek care, or take medication. It could go on and on.
And I think you brought up a great point, Sharon. As we are hopefully entering kind of a post-COVID era, overwhelmed hospital ICU units, I'm sure, cut some corners. I can't document it, but just hearing conversations, it happens. And hopefully that doesn't change the perception of healthcare going forward. I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch, to see what changes as a result of COVID.
Right.
Maybe some issues needed to be changed. I don't know. But I'm sure there are some core principles that shouldn't have been. And we're going to have to ask some hard questions going forward.
Absolutely.
Karen, good question. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. We are coming to a close here. So I wanted to thank all of you, the panelists. I wanted to thank our audience for asking some really great questions for sure, and definitely challenging the panel. I really appreciate your contribution as panelists and your expertise. I think that we've had a really honest and transparent conversation. I think that's fantastic. I know I've really enjoyed this, so thank you. It's been my honor to facilitate today. I think I'm going to turn it over to one of our planning managers to chat about the rest of the day. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all. This was such a phenomenal session, and wow, I'm walking away so inspired. I just have to thank each of you for being so candid and authentic and sharing from your areas of expertise. And I definitely wrote myself a note, as Dr. Watson, you mentioned, think true, helpful, inspiring, necessary and kind thoughts before it comes out. Amazing. So thank you all again. And we invite you all we have about an hour break, but definitely don't want you to walk away from the platform or the screen. What we want to encourage you to do is go to the networking section, and that's on the left side of the navigation panel, and just take this time to network with one another. We have such an incredible presence from across the globe, not just nationally. So let's use this time to connect with one another, learn from each other, and engage. And then we will see you at the research stage at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time, to learn more about moving forward, harnessing the power of research and the new normal. So with that said, thank you all that joined us, and thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.